System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city left.
Inner city left. We're finally getting our lives together here. But I'm very excited to have our first two-person panel. Sally hates capitalism and Matthew John. Thank y'all so much for being here. I want to just, I'm not gonna read the whole bio. I'm just gonna do a little skim and I'm gonna put everything in the description. Matthew John is a political commentator, writer, bus driver, and communist meme lord. He created the popular Instagram meme page, This American Left, which I was saying when I was a baby leftist, when I swear I was the first 5,000. I'm telling you, I was there from the jump. Also has a book, Millennial Marxist, which I'll also put in the description. Sally hates capitalism as a political commentator who's a Marxist-Leninist. I always have a problem saying Marxist-Leninist. Am I the only one? Anti-imperialist, pro-indigenous, anti-Zionist, ethnic Jew. And again, I'm just so glad to have y'all here. I am also accompanied by my partner in crime, not real crime. I mean that as a metaphor. I would never do a crime. Any crimes or revolutionary talk that I do is for entertainment purposes.
I believe in changing the system through the legal apparatus.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Reform. Yep.
So I'm ambassador you and Tanky, how you doing? And let's get it started.
Yo, guys, how are you doing? Thank you so much for being on our broadcast. I want to open up with a question that we get a lot that people perhaps need to have defined. So what would you say is the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism?
Should I? Okay. Well, as the Jew here, definitely the thing that I like to point out about this to highlight the difference is that we anti-Zionist Jews have existed as long as Zionism has existed. And Zionism is a settler colonial ideology that was created in the late 1800s. And so, obviously Jews have existed way longer than that. And so it's a very specific nationalistic, fascist, racist ideology. Is just with the emphasis on the settler colonial because it has to do with going and stealing land from people who are already living there on that land. Of course, Palestinians living in Palestine. And they had talked about potentially making that Zionist project elsewhere. And they tried to do it in Uganda at one point. But that is what Zionism is. And it also serves the purpose of getting more wealth, profits, access to resources, more domination for Western imperialism, for the Western capitalist class. So, but that is Zionism. That has always been Zionism since it was created by Theodor Herzl, a secular atheist Jew, ethnic Jew like myself, in the late 1800s. So, and there was even an anti-Zionist Jew who was in Parliament who voted against the Balfour Declaration. A lot of people don't know that. I like to remind people of that as well. So he was the only Jew in British Parliament at the time of the Balfour Declaration and voted against it. So again, just showing we anti-Zionist Jews have always existed.
Now, again, Balfour Declaration is something that a lot of people have heard of, but for context, can you say when the Balfour Declaration was created? Put that in context to World War II or the German use of forced labor and extermination camps, right? When is the Balfour Declaration happening in relation to these things?
You want me to
I mean, I believe it was 1917.
17, yeah.
So it was, technically around the time of World War I. And a lot of people don't realize, they think people who haven't really researched this kind of assume that it was, the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. And then it was immediately like, oh, we need to find a place for a state for European Jews. And they don't know the history that predates World War II. Obviously, like we said, going back to the late 1800s. So yeah, you can take it from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, just that, yeah, I think Matthew made a good point about like people think like Israel exists as a response to the Holocaust, but yeah, I mean that's obviously not the case. The Zionist project, they were trying to do it. They were trying to steal that land for many years before the Holocaust happened, before the Nazis rose to power in Germany. And like I said, Theodor Herzl, of course, in the late 1800s, obviously long before the Nazis. And also just the fact that it's about an ethnostate. I don't think I mentioned that specific word when I was talking about the difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. But really, it is an ethnostate, which is another version of what the Nazis were trying to create in Germany. But yeah, the Balfour Declaration is really when that Zionist settler colonial project got that backing officially from Britain, from that powerful entity. And it's when they realized, oh, it's very useful for our own purposes to support this project. And of course, Lord Balfour, being a total anti-Semite, and he had previously passed legislation to ban Jews from migrating to Britain. So just one more example of how it's not as if Israel is about the safety of Jews. It was at that point an excuse to get rid of the Jews.
I love the delineations that you guys are providing, right? Because it provides that context. Again, especially doubling down with the fact that this was an ethnostate made for European Jews, because the Limbic Jews were not invited. The Jews in Iran were not invited. The Danakalians and the Aksamites in Ethiopia were not invited.
Mm-hmm.
And even the Sephardic are made to feel like, well, you're almost Jewish, right? Like it's meant to be an Ashkenazi state. And I think that has really affected the way that even the construction of the way that the population comes together, as well as their outlook as it relates to other Jews, because we've threatened at this point a nuclear strike on Iran, which has one of the largest Jewish populations in the world. It's clearly not about protecting Jewish life.
And there's also, just to throw in there, the treatment of Ethiopian Jews, for instance, in Israel is, they basically are applying the same apartheid conditions to them as they do to Palestinians. Extreme racism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the thing is that Israel serves the purpose of I talked about Western imperialism and that's settler colonialism. They go together. And of course, white supremacy goes together. And so that is not a surprise. And I realized too, when I was talking about anti-Zionism versus anti-Semitism, what I didn't mention, which I probably should, is the fact that the term anti-Semitism, the history of that, it's always been white people shit. Anti-Semitism, as a concept was created by white Western Christians, white Westerners of at least a Christian background. And that had to do with them seeing Jews not only as having a specific religion, but being a specific racial group. And so they racialized us, my people, my ancestors. They did that. And that's really what anti-Semitism is. And it has to do with all those, we think of all these typical tropes, these anti-Semitic tropes about the Jews, pulling the strings behind the scenes and holding all of the power and, trying to destroy Western civilization, et cetera, et cetera. That is all white Westerners, white Western Christians. It is their stuff, and so it's just crazy when Zionists try to put that on Palestinians, on any Arabs, Muslims, and people who are simply advocating for the lives of Palestinians, for the land of Palestine. Obviously that has nothing to do with what anti-Semitism is.
I find it to be an interesting phenomenon because overwhelmingly the people that are called anti-Semitic the most tend to be people that are coming from Semitic tribes. The Palestinians are Semitic, the Arabs are Semitic, right? So like when you're talking about, like it's a Palestinian, like this is part of your ethnicity as well. And people have tended, as you say, to associate Semitism specifically with the tribes of Israel, the tribes of Judah, and relate that specifically to a biblical identity that plays out in the Christian mind. Like this is the chosen of God, and this, and so like you have people making geopolitical decisions that are based off of religious ideology as we again condemn, other theocratic leaning governments in the Middle East, right? When all of this is based upon theology, it's hard from a geopolitical point of view to explain why any other nation on earth would be able to pursue military projects with the fevered intensity of the Israeli experiment. So, I like that.
And we see sort of those hypocritical, actions by the United States, because we've already seen people in the Knesset present the Greater Israel map, and we're seeing that there is a fight in the north with Hezbollah. And again, the conversation was, I don't know if y'all remember this, Matthew and Sally, but there was this when Joe Biden came out and he was like, if other people want to get involved in this world war, don't. And he, kind of in that old like Goddard kind of your grandpa wagging his finger at you, way. And we see that Israel, not just against the Gazans and the, Hamas, which I think earlier today they already admitted they can't beat Hamas. You know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah. About to get fired. I guarantee you that he's been.
Yeah, and so I mean, my question is really like, I guess I don't have a question, but my thought process, and again, I'm just reacting to all the great things that are already being said, is it always tends to be separate rules for Israel, and then totally separate rules for the air population or African countries or Russia or South Asian countries or China. And, and again, all the points that y'all said, we're talking, about white supremacy, and it's just, it's tough to see. I wanted to ask this to everybody here, because I think this is really poignant for everyone. I saw this either today or yesterday. I don't know if y'all know Sheldon Adelson, but he's was one of the richest Jewish, I don't want to say Jewish, but definitely Zionist billionaires in the world. He passed away like 2 years ago, whatever, fuck him. And basically his widow, Miriam Adelson, she just bought the Dallas Mavericks, by the way, just like that. She basically came out and said she would pledge $100 million to support for former President Donald Trump's general election if he quote came out publicly and said they would liberate the West Bank. And I just wanted to get y'all's reaction to that.
I guess I'm not really surprised. Trump, it's hard to like distinguish between Trump and Biden sometimes, but I know Trump did move the U.S. embassy or the embassy to Jerusalem, which is very controversial, and is kind of in line with, his Christian extremist base, which are all Christian Zionists. And, there's been the effort to ethnically cleanse the West Bank since the inception of Israel. So, it's just kind of escalating and it's getting out of control. And that's just another signal of this.
Well, and that's the name of the game with capitalism. It's money. Money is power, and it gets what they want. And so, a billionaire buying a politician, obviously not a surprise under this system. But what I would think is interesting, like I've had a few, liberals try to say like, oh, well, clearly this means Trump is worse. Like, that's why like Adelson wants Trump. Like, then doesn't that mean you need to vote for Biden? And it's, that's pretty minor differences there in terms of what they are doing to Palestinians. either way, pretty fucking horrible. And so in terms of like splitting hairs about like, oh, who would massacre more Palestinians? Like, oh, well, Trump would massacre even more than Biden. It's like, okay, well, that's why I hate them both, and they both fucking suck, and we should object to both in every possible way, and obviously fight for socialism. And of course, and Matthew and I are both going to vote for Claudia and Karina with the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Although, unfortunately, in Missouri, they will not be on the ballot, and hopefully we can do a write-in. So obviously they're great on this issue, but obviously this is a systemic problem. So yeah, not a surprise.
I love it. So the one thing I would say is, to me, it goes back to the inherent flaws in the Supreme Court ruling of Citizens United. Once they ruled that capital counts as speech, right? What you ended up with is inevitable scenarios like this over and over again. You have Burisma giving Hunter Biden $50,000 a month to buy influence with his vice president father. You have $100 million campaign to Trump to enact this piece of legislation. I mean, to them, they see it as nothing more than just enacting legislation. And I think that's the interesting thing in this, because this is when you talk about like the mind state of Zionism, like all things are possible because we will it, as if it's in the United States' power to manifest that the West Bank could be given over. There are other people with voices that are speaking right now. The Houthis are speaking right now. Iran would have a feeling about that. Lebanon would have a feeling about that. And it's important to always distinguish between the Arab street and the Arab governments. Although someone like Sisi in Egypt might not do much, these kind of things create pressures within those populations themselves, right? A move that bold would have ripples that cannot be fully accounted for because you don't control all the variables. And I think we're about to get that right now with the all but inevitability of a full-fledged war between Hezbollah and the state of Israel. I just want to go back to what you were talking about earlier about like when Biden with the whole don't. The whole thing, like in rap culture, is like, don't sneak this, right? Say who you're talking to, because no one even knew he was talking to. Like even Putin had a comment about that. Like the United States has parked their aircraft carriers as if we cannot hit them from the Black Seas. You know what I'm saying? Like with Kinjals, it's like, buddy, we can send something to you that'll be there in less than 4 minutes. Like an aircraft carrier moves at 20 knots. A hypersonic missile is flying at 5 to 9 times the speed of sound. It's not like you can move out of the way, right? Lebanon has many of these same capabilities. And it becomes more interesting, right? When you have someone like Sergei Lavrov saying specifically, if the United States continues to arm our adversaries, we might have to make a symmetric response, and leaving that to your interpretation of what that means, right? Because that cracks the whole game open. Like to know that at this point, you would have someone with technology on par with any 5th gen military. Like that's the thing that's always been different that Israel never had to face. Like Israel in the 6-Day War is going against not great Soviet equipment coming from Egypt, coming from Syria, coming from Lebanon. But what we've learned in this Ukrainian conflict is NATO technology no longer has this decisive edge over other developed nations, right? Iran is able to create technologies that are able, and as they demonstrated earlier this year, like we can be made to be felt, right? Imagine that now with a force amplifier like the Russians, right? So that's my thing, is like Adelson speaks as if the Americans can just gift them this thing, but this is a thing that no one really knows what will happen except a lot more death.
Well, here's my thought on all this. I mean, it seems to me that the IDF and all the Israeli forces are just not going to be able to do what they want to do unless they can drag the United States in with it, you know? And I don't know. again, the wisest of us the wisest of us cannot tell.
That's what makes it such a great investment, though, right? Because again, just to refer back to the hostilities between Iran and Israel after the Iranian ambassador was killed in Syria, the active defense, which engaged the French, the Israelis, the Americans, and the British, right? All of their air forces were made available to defend Israel. That one day cost over $1.6 billion. That one day of defense, right? So again, when you look at an investment like $100 million, that's nothing. It's so, you have to do it. Never mind the fact that it will also be a tax write-off, right? So like, when you look at the return on that kind of investment, that's why no American politician can resist. It's not them that will suffer.
Yeah. So, and one of those reasons I think that, again, the United States there's a lot of factors. And I think somebody was mentioning the evangelical point, but also I wanted to mention AIPAC and AIPAC's role in sort of the hijacking or the purchasing, some would say, of Congress. And, why is it that Israel has such a hold on the United States, whether it be the evangelical vote, whether it be the Zionist vote, which Joe Biden came out and said, I'm not a Jew, but I'm a Zionist. And also, just the owning of the Congress. How does AIPAC, how does the evangelical, how does that have a stranglehold on the West in terms of supporting Israel?
I kind of see it as like almost a form of blowback, because the U.S. has used Israel as like a military outpost and an extension of U.S. and Western imperialism for so long. And now Israel has become so fanatical that it's obvious. I mean, it's becoming like the new Nazi Germany in many ways. And it is to the point where the U.S. doesn't know what to do. And these, like the people in Congress are being kind of bribed with donations and lobbying. And I mean, there was a political commentator and Professor John Mearsheimer was recently talking about how what's happening now is really not in the U.S. geostrategic and geopolitical interests in Israel. And it's like almost suicidal. And they still can't, the hubris is too strong. And they're like, Rafah is the red line. Actually, never mind. And they'll just keep following what Israel's doing at this point.
I kind of see it as like, it's like this interesting relationship where it's like, who's controlling who? Because for sure it's a, U.S. Western military outpost. Israel is most definitely, but it's like, I sometimes think of the analogy, somebody raising a spoiled brat, like they give this kid, everything and, never ever say no to the kid, and they like create a monster, and like then this kid grows up and then that kid makes demands of that parent, and then it's like who's controlling who kind of thing, and then they control the parent, you know what I mean? So it's like in many ways, like Israel is like baby United States. It's like, it's almost like may as well be our 51st state. Except they actually have universal healthcare for the Israelis, but unlike us,
Americans never go for it.
Yeah. But then it's like, in other ways, they are controlling us. But I just think like either way, it doesn't even matter, because the United States will have their back no matter what, and fund them, give them the money, give them the arms, no matter what, unless they are absolutely forced to stop.
That's a great point. And it goes to the dysfunctional relationship, right? It's funny when you listen to Bibi Netanyahu talk about his relationship with America. It's like this rock solid alliance where, and the fact is, like, behind the scenes, it's been said that he hated Barack Obama. He dislikes President Biden extensively, right? And yet they still have this thing where they have to work with each other. For example, when he's saying that it's unconscionable that Americans wouldn't be holding up the weapons right now to Biden. So you're saying this to, let's just again look at the power structure here, which is quite complicated, right? So you have President Netanyahu speaking to citizen, right? The Secretary of State, who is an Israeli citizen. So that's already one relationship. This is your president talking to a citizen. You also then have the relationship of the Secretary of State, who is sent to deliver a message from the empire to Netanyahu, and Netanyahu having this conversation with this person that is a negative conversation about their boss. And both of these things are existing at the same time. Like, these are very tenuous relationships. You have a person who is an American citizen and also an Israeli citizen. In the capacity that he serves the United States, he serves as the Secretary of State, sent to carry the bidding of the empire. But he is not the emperor, right? So like that kind of a conversation is actually out of pocket anyway. Like, you don't essentially talk shit about my boss to me, right? But nothing happens, right? You have the White House scrapped a U.S.-Israeli meeting where Biden was supposed to go, but now, because not even that he said these things to Biden, that he said these things to Blinken, but because he published the conversation about that conversation in English in a way that embarrasses Biden, right? So like, like you say, there's the pouty kid, but then there's the inconsolate father too, right? Well, I'll go to your room, but I'm still gonna make sure you get dessert tonight, I think that's a great metaphor for, again, just the codependent kind of toxicity that exists between these two states that exist to magnify each other. I mean, they're mirror images of each other.
I wanted to ask.
Well, just in closing, I would say Mao once referred to them as the unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East, the way that Taipei is the unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Far East, right? And they serve much the same function to prevent any of those regions from creating a hegemon that can challenge Western power.
Yeah, I think we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to just expound upon it a bit. As we saw over, and it's still occurring right now, the tremendous protests all around the world, but certainly here in the United States on the campuses. And what I've been seeing, and I think this is something that the Netanyahu government and the rest of, the Western world is trying to, unfortunately, unable to stick this anti-Semitism brand to the, Jewish Students for Peace or whatever it may be. I wanted to talk to y'all just a little bit, just maybe explain sort of how like the American propaganda system works and maybe like how it's failing right now, in terms of pushing people to the more Zionist, lobby or pro-Israeli lobby.
Yeah, well, can I just say real quick though, I just wanted to correct you, Little Tanky, on something, because I don't think Blinken actually is a dual citizen. I think that's inaccurate. I had heard that before as well, and I know like I've seen these memes about that have been criticized about like the Jews that were, and I don't think that's not what you were trying to do, but where I've seen like these memes about that, about the Jews that work in the White House and the administration, and that's where I think I've seen it, that particular point debunked. Like, he's definitely Zionist. He is of a Jewish background, and he's definitely Zionist. But it's like, even if he were an Israeli dual citizen, which he's not, like the thing is, the people who are going to get hired in the administration are already going to be Zionists. You know what I mean? It's like
Thank you for that correction.
Yeah, and it's just the fact that the system is Zionist because that's Western capitalism and Western imperialism. It is Zionism. It goes together. So like, in order to get those types of positions in power, in this power structure, you're going to support Zionism. And if you like enthusiastically, passionately support Zionism, that's all the better. Like, you're even more likely to get that promotion, that position up there. But I just wanted to put that out there because I've heard other people say that, but that's inaccurate.
He's ethnically Jewish, and they have a familiarity, like the fact that Netanyahu calls him Tony, right?
Yeah.
My friend Tony.
So
I mean, he's probably traveled there a million times. I'm sure he passionately loves Israel. He probably grew up in a Zionist household.
Right.
Absolutely. But like, I just always like to remind people that it is the Christian Zionists who, that's the majority of Zionists are Christian, and it's the Christian Zionists who fund this project overwhelmingly so and give it its power. So that's all. I just wanted to, put that out there.
No, thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was actually raised evangelical Christian, so I have experience in my past of churches that would organize these trips to Israel and funding for certain projects in Israel and things like that. So it's very widespread.
And do you want to talk about the Christian beliefs about that? Like why?
Yeah, well, I mean, in short, it's like this biblical prophecy that they want all the Jews to return to, the land of Israel, which is not what the state of Israel is. Some people get confused by that too. But to usher in the second coming of Christ and the rapture and so forth. So
and then what happens to us if we're all there?
Yeah, well, strangely enough, they believe that the Jews will go to hell. So it's burning Jews, which is kind of the essence of anti-Semitism.
Exactly. They don't exactly love Jews.
Right. It goes back to the Balfour Declaration all over again, right? I want them to have a Jewish state over there. Right?
Exactly.
It's the British version of the American Liberian experiment, except with real backing. And
because they don't think we belong anywhere else. Like they just want us all to go there. Yeah.
And I kind of wanted to mention on the topic of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, I think that Zionism is not only has links to anti-Semitism, but I think it ultimately is an expression of anti-Semitism. And we didn't mention really that Theodore Herzl also acknowledged the alliance between anti-Semites and the Zionist project in terms of wanting to displace European Jews and, force them to live somewhere else, essentially. And it was, I believe Herzl said that it was Jews themselves that were responsible for anti-Semitism, just by existing in Europe.
Right. For daring to live there at all. And also it's like Zionists need anti-Semitism in order to justify this. Exactly. To justify Zionism, to justify Israel at all. And so they will never confront and try to combat anti-Semitism. They want it to happen, and they love to, and that's why it's an easy smear because it serves their purposes every time.
Right. Wikipedia earlier this week has now moved the ADL as an unreliable. So they'll no longer use ADL statistics on anti-Semitism because they found them to be unreliable. So I mean, it just
like victims of communism.
Right.
I heard that the ADL was using pro-Palestine protests as instances of anti-Semitism.
Oh, absolutely.
Over half of them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, simply wearing the Palestinian headscarf is now seen as by the ADL an act of religious intolerance.
Yeah, they're a joke.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm using this term right. I went to community college, so I never know if I'm saying anything properly, but I don't want to get away and not see the forest for the trees here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the actual Palestinians that are under siege right now in the G word, which we really can't even say here on YouTube because they try to demonetize. Not that we're getting monetized, but I'm just saying you can't say the G word, but a G word is occurring right now.
Systemic unaliving.
Right. Or however the New York Times would phrase it, right? 6-year-old girl no longer alive after whatever it may be. But I just wanted to ask y'all a little bit about what are Gazans facing right now on the ground, and as a former evangelical or as a Jewish person, how you respond to that, or just as a human being, how do you respond to that?
I mean, I can't even fathom it. It's almost like we're the wrong people to ask, obviously, but it's like so horrific. It's hard to, I mean, it's the first live streamed, G word, as we're saying. And it's just so overwhelming. And, I can't imagine it. And it's so systematic, and like the displacing of over 1 million people to this one location to then go and attempt to exterminate the population as they've been doing this whole time, and using starvation and carpet bombing and other tactics. And I think it's just kind of a wake-up call, and it is radicalizing a lot of people. I know that word gets thrown around a lot, but it is just to see the response throughout the world of the mass protests. It is inspiring, but it's not, it's not enough. And it's ultimately, I think, up to the armed resistance in Palestine and in Lebanon and Iran and in Yemen, for instance, to determine the outcome of this.
Yeah, I can't believe anybody is still condemning the H word that we probably also can't say at this point. I mean, of course, we never did, because we already knew, that there would be no H word without the horrors of the constant mass slaughtering and, land theft and apartheid state occupation, et cetera, of Israel. But it's just a horror show. It's a nightmare. And it's like the fact that it's just allowed to go on, and it's horrible that no one else is stepping in. And then you've got all these, it's just all these people trying to pretend it's not the G word when it obviously is, and acting as if it has to look exactly like the Holocaust somehow in order to be that, when of course that's not the case. And it's like, the Israelis have said, sometimes they've said the quiet part out loud, like they're not even hiding it about their intentions to take over all of this land. And they already have plans for what they want to do with it. And I mean, obviously, I've been saying for a while, really since the beginning of this, that, well, it was always the G word. It's just that it was a slower moving G word. And now it is, they have sped it up. They've ramped up that G word for a faster and more efficient one, and that's what they've always wanted. It's like they just to finish the job, basically, that they started with the Nakba and before that, they were already there trying to create this settler colonial state project. But yeah, it's just always been so clear. They just go and they steal land, and they pretended as if there were no people living there. And obviously Palestinians have always been living there. And so it's always been ethnic cleansing and G-side. Those two things go together, because when you're doing ethnic cleansing, well, what about the people who don't leave or who can't leave? Well, what do you do with them? Obviously, that's why it's G-side, because hopefully I can say that part. I didn't say G word, but anyway, so it's just, I can't believe anybody denies it still. And it's like, it's constant gaslighting. It's horrible.
I mean, gaslighting is exactly the phrase, right? I mean, I remember 2 years ago, Admiral Kirby, with tears in his eyes, crying for the poor Ukrainian children that were being moved out of the war zone. Maybe it was better to keep them with Fab 3000s falling in the sky, but the Russian Federation did something about that, right? But there are no tears, right? We get no alligator tears, no crocodile tears, right? For the thousands of Palestinian children that have
over
died,
15,000 right? is the conservative estimate.
Depending on
I think it's probably a lot more than that. I don't think we have accurate numbers at all.
And Ralph Nader spoke to that. Like, at this point, realistically, we're probably looking at hundreds of thousands dead.
Right.
Yep.
The people that can count those things have been killed. You know,
Right, exactly.
all of the UN bodies that, I mean, again, imagine a conflict where for all of the things that the Russian Federation have done, right? They've never purposely fired on UN aid workers in a contemporary battle zone, right? Whereas nowadays the IDF has literal GPS coordinates because UNRWA sends them, right? And they're vetted by the Americans. And then, oops, wow, the ambulance still gets hit, the hospital still gets hit, and the president says it wasn't them, it was the other team, right? Like it's a football game. Which is
and
true.
then every hospital then was bombed. So
Right.
whose team was that? You know, it's like they never seem to follow up.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. A question I would like to ask is, what at this point do you see the path to peace, if at all? Right. It's assumed there will always be Jews living in the Levant. There will always be non-Jews living in the Levant. Right. It's been this way since at least the time of Salah ad-Din, actually much before then, all the way back to the Byzantine Empire. What would a path forward look like? Or do you believe that the two-state possibility is still there, maybe 67 borders or something totally new? What would that look like?
I don't know realistically what would happen in the future in terms of Palestine becoming free, but I do remember that I can't say that the age. You know, the Palestinian resistance has agreed to not only ceasefire but also to a two-state solution in some of their negotiations, which obviously Israel rejects every time. So it's, like I said before, you know, it's going to depend on the resistance and kind of this new alliance that's building up with some of the global South countries that have been most targeted by U.S. imperialism over the years. And, you know, I mean, obviously right now it's Yemen and Iran that are participating. And then Hezbollah. And then there's the alliance between Russia and China. And there's just a lot of kind of promising developments in geopolitics. But like I said, you know, it looks very bleak as it stands right now, and it looks like it's just escalating more with Israel and Hezbollah.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely obviously don't know, but I always say to people who, you know, act like, oh, well, you know, well, what's the solution then, you know? And it's real simple. The step one, the entire power structure of Israel must go, that it must be completely dismantled, abolished. That's step one. That is the root cause of all of this. That is the source of the violence, of the ethnic cleansing, of the genocide, of the land theft. And so, yeah, that has to go. So it's not that we're arguing for, you know, doing anything violence against the people that are there in Israel. But here's the thing, like, I mean, if those people could see Palestinians as equal human beings, first of all, a lot of them have dual citizenship elsewhere. And if they could actually see Palestinians as equal human beings, those people with dual citizenship would be like, you know what, we had a good run. I think it's time to go. You know, and then, but that's the problem, is the propaganda is so strong there. The brainwashing is so strong, like as bad as we think it is in the United States. I mean, God, it's even worse there. And like the nationalism, it's so intense. And, you know, and then of course, everybody is in the IDF, the IOF, as we call it. So it's all over. It's just such a part of that society. So it's hard to imagine that most of those people there who have citizenship in Israel would just be like able to, you know, accept that Palestinians are human beings who deserve liberation. So I don't know, but that's why I'm like, okay, well, you guys can go. You have the means. Overwhelmingly, they have the means to get out of there and to go somewhere else, whereas the Palestinians don't and can't.
If we could get re-education. I'm just kidding.
Right.
Demonetized for that.
I always think it's quite fascinating, right, when you become a product of your own propaganda. And I think the IDF suffers from that. And largely, it reminds me of Sparta, right? How Sparta's ultimate demise was the mythology of Sparta, how great they were militarily, and how they could defeat any enemy because of what they had done in Thermopylae without advancing their tactics, right? Which is why, again, when they went to conquest against the Romans, they were devastated. And I think that this same kind of mythology is what's damaging Israelis' capacity on the battlefield, because you've always had to live with the stories of yesteryear, where in 6 days, 7 days, uh, Syria is defeated, Egypt is defeated, Transjordan is defeated, all of those forces, Iraq is defeated. Whereas when you look at their capacities today, right, it's not grown in that same amplified way. Of course, they have doomsday options, but until you're willing to break that thing, I mean, that changes everything in that way. Up until then, you still have to deal with conventional forces. I remember watching, before the Gaza invasion began, watching hundreds of Merkava tanks right outside the Gaza walls, right? And I'm thinking, like, these tactics would not last 1 week in the Ukrainian theater. You could never park, right, this many tanks in one place and think that there would not be an immediate response as far as FPV drones, as far as artillery, and all of these things. It's kind of like a boxer who has an inflated win record because all you fought are not strong fighters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is the peril that waits for them in the northern borders, because you're talking about an army that is trained in asymmetry, but also is equipped with technology you're not used to fighting against.
Because they're usually dealing with, unarmed, under-resourced,
5 years of sanctions, 10 years of sanctions.
Citizens for the most part. And there was something, great points. I got one more question. Something I want to say, and I got one more question to get us out of here. I'm like, how people are like, I'm swimming, like I'm so hype, I'm swimming. There was something that Matthew said that I think was important. I think that's what you're getting at, Tanky, is there are some really strong, really well-equipped armies out there, or at least forces out there. We mentioned Hezbollah. We also have the Al-Qassam Brigade, H-word, the Yemenis and the Houthis and the Iranians, not to mention the Egyptian border and the turn-up that's in Jordan as well. It's going to be these armed forces that come to the aid of the Palestinians. And I think it's just as a reminder, for us here in the United States, again, it's just so difficult to build any true resistance because of the police and the panopticon and all the things that are around us. So anyway, and we posted something earlier today on Inner City Left. Check us out on Inner City Left. Also, That American Left. Also, Sally Hates Capitalism. We'll put all the information in the description. But I wanted to, because y'all talked about Claudia and Karina a little bit earlier, and I know in Nevada, Jill Stein is being taken to court over her appearance on the ballot. I just wanted to ask, like, how important is it to sort of exit the Democratic Party? I don't think anyone here is a Republican, but also the Republican Party, and kind of exist in this more third-party realm?
I think it's extremely important to boycott the Democratic Party, and it goes without saying for Marxists and other leftists who have become disillusioned with our political system. And the younger generation is seeing this as well. But, once you become educated on the two-party system, you'll realize the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are just two different factions of the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie here. They both represent the capitalist class. And in terms of voting for a third party, I don't really see, bourgeois elections in and of themselves as important. So like whether or not you vote, I don't see that as important. But in terms of a real like working class socialist or communist movement to begin to develop traction in the US, I do think utilizing the political system is like really important, especially the way that Claudia and Karina are doing it with the PSL, and just pushing the message. Again, the stuff we're talking about the two-party system, the necessity of a working class political party to ultimately take power. And you don't want to get demonetized by talking too much about that, but it is important to get the movement going and that message out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's just we need to oppose all, fascist, bloodthirsty genocide. Ooh, gee. Maniacs. I was gonna say, sorry. And so it doesn't even like the getting in the weeds of who do you think is a little bit better on this thing or that thing, like, is just irrelevant. So, ultimately this system is obviously the problem. And we don't think that the necessary changes will come from within the system, but regardless, it's about, I agree with Matthew. I like how Claudia de la Cruz and Karina Garcia and the Party for Socialism and Liberation, I like that they utilize all of this attention on these elections to, promote socialism, to promote the PSL, and to try to create a bigger socialist proletariat movement coalition. I think that's definitely good and necessary. And it's less obviously about who you vote for or whatever on election day, because that's still under this horrible system. But I think it is nice to make it known that you do not support this capitalist, fascist, imperialist system.
I'm gonna be honest with you guys, man. I mostly vote just so that I can take part in the jury process, because that is a way that you really can make an impact.
Not guilty.
Not guilty.
Not guilty.
I'm sorry, the state did not prove its case, right?
Exactly.
Of course, whatever your forms of resistance are, it's always good from an asymmetrical point of view to be able to do lots of things to disrupt, right? Even as simple as saying, I am aware of this process and I will make my voice heard, even though I do not expect change from this, but you will hear me. You will not say that I did not say that I was into it. I don't expect to be, the thing about political parties, right? Because when we're talking about the resistance movement in Gaza, that is a political party, first and foremost. Political parties in and of themselves
voted
tend to be dangerous things, right? Like, no matter how you feel about the resistance movement in Gaza, the political party that dropped a nuclear bomb on the world, that was the Democrats, right? So when you're talking about like a loss of life, like, if you're going to look at the damage that these parties do, let's be honest then about the amount of lives, as we were talking earlier, lives destroyed by communism. How many lives were destroyed by capitalism? How many lives have the Republicans taken? We took 1 million in Iraq. How many lives have the Democrats taken? Who could even easily assess these kind of things, right?
It's every day.
The party of national defense, right? This is almost inconceivable in the 2001 political atmosphere. And so this is the danger of political parties. They took someone like an Obama and used him to sheepdog away most of the people that felt like something was wrong. You watched George W. Bush and you're like, oh, this can't be it. And so they give you this guy and he looks like, well, he's a better spokesman and he's Ivy League educated. I mean, not that Bush wasn't Ivy League educated.
Yale man.
He's a Yale man, a Bones man. But
as Biden said, the first mainstream African American who's bright and clean and articulate, or whatever he said.
It's a storybook, man. That was the end of that.
Biden trying not to be racist.
Not like corn pop,
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to thank y'all again so much. And I'm so appreciative. I hope we can do this again. Please go out
Definitely.
there and get Matthew's book. I'm going to have that in the description. I might email. I want to send y'all some shirts. I don't know if that's corny or whatever.
No, that's
But,
cool.
I'm
For
so
sure.
appreciative
Awesome.
of y'all. Maybe we can get on here and talk about, Marxism, and you can teach me how to say Marxist Leninist in a cool way. I would love that. Any final thoughts from Tanky or from either of y'all? And again, I'm so appreciative to have y'all, and thank y'all for being here.
Networking coalition. This is how you disrupt. That's what I got.
Yeah, I just appreciate the discussion. Appreciate the invite.
Yeah, no, me too. It's nice to connect with you guys and spend some time talking to you about all of this. It's nice to know, that we're not alone in our frustration and anger, rage about all this horrible shit. So, because we're definitely not. There's a lot of us.
Yeah,
they isolate us, and they don't want us discussing these things. And it's important for us to break through, and connect with each other. And I appreciate the cost platform buzz. And like I said, let's do this again, and we can collaborate in whatever ways. And we're here to help too if we can do anything. Inner City Left, we are on YouTube. Subscribe, we have a Patreon. Hit us up. We're also available on Apple Podcasts. I always say iTunes. We're not on iTunes. We're on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, everywhere you find podcasts. And yeah, we out. Peace.
Thank you.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city love.